Have you ever stood beneath a star-filled sky and felt an overwhelming sense of wonder? That deep, almost primal fascination with the cosmos is something humanity has carried for thousands of years, a silent conversation between our souls and the infinite expanse above. Since the dawn of civilization, we have looked up at those distant points of light and sensed they were speaking to us, telling stories, offering guidance, and perhaps even holding the secrets of our existence. What if I told you that throughout history, certain extraordinary individuals claimed they could not just listen, but actually answer back? Think about that for a moment. People who believed they could converse with the stars themselves. Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover the lives and mysteries of 25 such legends, visionaries, mystics, scientists, and seers from across the ages who insisted they had unlocked the language of the cosmos. From ancient priests interpreting celestial omens for kings, to Renaissance astronomers who saw divine geometry in the movement of planets, to modern-day pioneers listening for signals from beyond our world, each of these figures represents a unique chapter in humanity's bold and beautiful attempt to reach beyond our earthly limits. Their stories are woven with threads of mystery, courage, and sometimes controversy, inviting us to reconsider what it means to seek connection with the unknown. This is more than a history lesson. It's an invitation to step into a world where the boundaries between science and spirit blur, where imagination and discovery collide under the same timeless sky that has captivated us all. We'll explore tales of celestial communication that challenge our understanding of reality and inspire awe at the sheer ambition of the human spirit. So settle in, open your mind, and allow yourself to wonder, what might the stars have to say to us, and who among us was bold enough to believe they could reply? Our journey through the lives of these 25 extraordinary individuals begins now. And to begin that journey, we must travel back to one of the oldest and most profound accounts of celestial contact, the story of the ancient patriarch Enoch. Found within the sacred texts of the Hebrew Bible and expanded upon in the ancient manuscripts known as the Book of Enoch, his tale is not merely one of a man who walked with God, but of a man who was taken by angels on a voyage through the heavens themselves. Enoch's experiences, recorded thousands of years ago, read less like a simple spiritual parable and more like the detailed logbook of an astronaut, a traveler shown the intricate mechanics of the cosmos. According to these ancient writings, Enoch did not experience death as other men did. Instead, he was physically taken up from the earth, brought into the divine realm to receive wisdom that was meant to remain hidden from humanity. During his otherworldly journeys, as described in the Book of Enoch, he was guided by angels known as the Watchers. These celestial beings acted as his instructors, revealing the secrets of creation. They showed him the pathways of the sun and the moon, the cycles of the stars, and the very structure of the seasons. He was given a grand tour of the universe, from the storehouses of the winds to the foundations of the earth. What makes this so extraordinary is the specific, almost technical nature of the astronomical knowledge he supposedly received. The text describes the solar year with surprising accuracy, details the movements of heavenly bodies, and even divides the year into a 364-day calendar, a system that reflects a sophisticated, if different, understanding of celestial mechanics for that era. This wasn't vague stargazing. It was presented as a formal education in the operation of the universe, granted by beings who understood its laws perfectly. The implications of Enoch's story have fascinated theologians, historians, and even scientists for centuries. Was this a divine revelation, a metaphorical vision, or could it be interpreted as an ancient record of contact with a higher intelligence? Some modern authors, drawing connections to the theory of ancient astronauts, point to the descriptions of his travel, being lifted up, moving through different levels of heaven, and receiving advanced knowledge as potential evidence of an encounter that was technological rather than purely spiritual. The angels, or watchers in this context, are reimagined as extraterrestrial visitors imparting crucial information to a selected human. Whether one views it through a lens of faith or speculative history, Enoch's narrative establishes a powerful archetype, the human who is chosen to bridge the vast gap between Earth and the stars, returning with secrets that forever alter our understanding of our place in the cosmos. His legacy is the ultimate testament to the ancient desire not just to watch the skies, but to truly know them. From the primordial mists of Enoch's heavenly journey, we now travel east to the ancient Persian plateau, where another legendary voice emerged from the silence to speak of the stars. His name was Zarathustra, known to the Greek world as Zoroaster, a prophet whose divine revelations would forge one of the world's oldest continuously practiced religions and forever change humanity's spiritual relationship with the cosmos. While the exact dates of his life are shrouded in the distant past, many scholars place him around 1500 to 1200 years before the Common Era, a visionary who walked the earth during a time of profound transition from polytheistic nature worship toward a more structured, ethical monotheism. His story is not one of a solitary hermit, but of a seeker who, after years of wandering and deep contemplation, experienced a series of earth-shattering visions that he believed came directly from the supreme wisdom, Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light. These were not fleeting dreams, but intense, immersive encounters that Zoroaster described as a direct line of communication with the divine. In his hymns, known as the Gathas, he speaks of being ushered into the presence of Ahura Mazda and receiving the fundamental truths of existence. Central to this revelation was a grand cosmic dualism, a perpetual battle between Ashar, which is order, truth, and light, and Drudge, which is deceit, chaos, and darkness. This was not merely a philosophical concept, it was a cosmological blueprint where the entire universe, including the celestial bodies, were active participants in this spiritual war. The stars, the moon, and especially the sun were not distant gods to be appeased, but were seen as creations of Ahura Mazda, pure manifestations of light and energy fighting against the void of darkness. For Zoroaster, to observe the heavens was to witness the very front line of this eternal struggle. This celestial framework provided his followers with a powerful and empowering worldview. Humans were not mere pawns but active soldiers in this cosmic conflict, endowed with free will to choose between the path of light or darkness. Every good thought, word, and deed was a strike against the forces of chaos and an alignment with the divine order of the universe. The priests of this new faith, the Magi, became meticulous astronomers, mapping the movements of the stars not for mere prediction but to better understand the rhythm and will of the Creator. They saw the orderly, predictable paths of the planets and stars as the ultimate expression of Ashar, a celestial proof of a rational and good universe. Their sophisticated astral observations allowed them to develop a precise calendar and make significant contributions to early astronomy, all in service of aligning human activity with the cosmic order. Perhaps most fascinating is the role of the Amsha Spenters, the divine entities or holy spirits that surround Ahura Mazda. These were not distant angels but radiant emanations of the Creator's own attributes, concepts like good purpose, immortality, and devotion. Zoroaster taught that by embodying these virtues, humanity could effectively communicate with the divine realm and influence the material world. It was believed that the prophet himself could converse with these celestial beings, receiving guidance that he would then impart to his community. His teachings suggest that the universe is fundamentally communicative, that the stars in their silent, luminous journey across the night sky are broadcasting a message of order and hope, and that a prepared human soul can learn to listen and respond. In this way, Zoroaster stands as a monumental figure who transformed the sky from a tapestry of capricious gods into a rational, moral, and participatory universe, inviting humanity to join the conversation. And from the ordered cosmos of ancient Persia, Our search for those who listen to the heavens brings us to the shores of the Mediterranean, to the vibrant world of ancient Greece, and a man whose name is synonymous with the logic of numbers, yet whose life was steeped in profound mysticism, Pythagoras. Born around 570 years before the Common Era on the island of Samos, Pythagoras would become far more than a mathematician. He was a philosopher, a spiritual teacher, and the founder of a secretive religious society that operated more like an ancient mystery school than a modern academic institution. He fled the tyranny of his homeland and eventually settled in the Greek colony of Croton in southern Italy, where he established his influential community, a brotherhood bound by strict vows of secrecy and a shared belief that the entire universe could be understood through the sacred language of mathematics. For Pythagoras and his followers, numbers were not merely abstract tools for counting or measuring. They were the very substance of reality, the divine building blocks of all creation. They believed that every aspect of existence, from the motion of the planets to the principles of justice and the nature of the human soul, could be expressed and understood through numerical relationships. This wasn't a dry, academic exercise, it was a form of spiritual revelation. The most famous example of this is, of course, the Pythagorean theorem governing right-angled triangles, but to the Brotherhood, this was not just a geometric rule. It was a glimpse into the eternal and perfect truths that govern a seemingly imperfect world, a key to unlocking the hidden architecture of the cosmos. This belief reached its most poetic and profound expression in the concept for which Pythagoras is most legendary, the music of the spheres. He taught that as the planets moved through the heavens on their celestial paths, they did not move in silence. Instead, each planet, with its unique size, speed, and orbital distance from Earth, produced a specific musical tone as it hurtled through the ether. These individual tones, inaudible to ordinary human ears, blended together into a sublime and perfect harmonic chord, a continuous cosmic symphony. Pythagoras alone was said to possess the rare spiritual refinement necessary to actually hear this music, a gift he claimed to have received from the gods. This was not a metaphor to him, it was a literal, physical reality based on his mathematical observations. He had discovered that musical intervals pleasing to the human ear, like the octave or the fifth, were produced by simple mathematical ratios of string lengths on a lyre. He then reasoned that the majestic movements of the heavens, being the most perfect and orderly system of all, must also operate according to these same perfect ratios, producing the ultimate harmony. This idea of celestial harmony was inextricably linked to his revolutionary teachings on the human soul. Pythagoras preached a doctrine of reincarnation, or the transmigration of souls. He believed the soul was immortal and divine, a fragment of the same cosmic intelligence that animated the stars. Before its imprisonment in a physical body, the soul resided among the stars in the pristine heavenly realm. Life on Earth was therefore a kind of exile, and the ultimate goal of human existence was to purify the soul through intellectual pursuit, ethical living, and strict discipline, much like the ascetic practices of his secret society, so that after death it could break free from the cycle of rebirth and return to its stellar home. To study mathematics and to listen for the music of the spheres was, for a Pythagorean, a form of sacred practice. It was a way of attuning one's own soul to the divine order from which it came, a method of remembering its celestial origin and harmonizing with the universe itself. In this way, Pythagoras fused science, religion, and mysticism into a single, powerful worldview, establishing himself as a true legend who didn't just look at the stars, but who listened to their song and understood the mathematical language in which it was written. Leaving behind the mathematical harmonies of Pythagoras, we arrive at the heart of classical Athens and the towering intellect of Plato, a philosopher whose ideas would echo through the ages and fundamentally shape the Western quest for cosmic understanding. While Pythagoras spoke of hearing the universe's music, Plato envisioned a class of individuals who could actually see its underlying score, the perfect, eternal blueprints of reality itself. In his monumental work, The Republic, he introduces us to the concept of the philosopher king, an ideal ruler whose authority is derived not from birth or wealth, but from a profound and hard-won knowledge of ultimate truth. For Plato, the physical world we perceive with our senses is merely a dim shadow, a flawed copy of a far more real and perfect realm he called the world of forms. Imagine walking through a cave your entire life, seeing only flickering shadows cast on a wall, and believing that to be the full extent of reality. Plato's allegory of the cave suggests that most of us are those prisoners. The true philosopher is the one who breaks free from their chains, ascends out of the cave, and is gradually able to behold the outside world illuminated by the sun. In this analogy, the sun represents the highest form, the form of the good, the ultimate source of all truth, beauty, and reality. The other forms, perfect, abstract concepts like justice, beauty, circle, and human, are the true objects of knowledge that the physical world imperfectly mimics. This is where the training of the philosopher king becomes a rigorous intellectual and spiritual ascent, a curriculum designed to reorient the soul toward these celestial truths. Their education was not about memorizing facts, but about awakening a dormant faculty of the mind to perceive a higher reality. It began with mathematics and geometry, not for practical application, but because these disciplines deal with perfect, unchanging objects, a perfect circle, an exact number, that point the soul toward the abstract world of forms. This training would culminate in the study of dialectic, a method of reasoned discussion and logical argument designed to strip away all assumptions and sense-based opinions until the mind could grasp the pure, unadulterated form of the good itself. A ruler who had achieved this direct knowledge would no longer be swayed by the petty desires and shifting opinions of the masses. They would govern with absolute justice because they were, in essence, taking their orders directly from a cosmic source of truth. Their decisions would be in perfect alignment with the eternal, rational order of the universe. While Plato doesn't explicitly say these forms are located among the stars, their description as transcendent, eternal, and perfect realities existing in a higher plane led many later thinkers to view them as cosmic truths. To know the forms was to possess a kind of star wisdom, an understanding of the divine architecture that structures all of existence. This powerful vision of the philosopher's ascent to cosmic consciousness did not end with ancient Greece. It flowed like an underground river through history, surfacing centuries later to profoundly influence mystical and esoteric traditions. In the 3rd century of the Common Era, a philosophical school known as Neoplatonism, founded by the thinker Plotinus, took Plato's ideas and expanded them into a comprehensive spiritual system. For Neoplatonists, the ultimate reality, called the One, emanates outward in layers of being, including a divine realm of intellect or nous which contains the Platonic forms. The human soul's goal was to achieve henosis, a mystical union with this divine source through contemplation and virtue, effectively returning to its cosmic home. This framework provided a powerful language for later mystics, alchemists, and hermeticists who sought knowledge of the divine through the study of the cosmos. They saw the orderly movements of the planets and stars as a physical manifestation of that same rational, emanated reality. To understand astronomy and astrology was not mere superstition. It was to read the visible language of the divine mind, to decipher the symbols of the forms written in light across the night sky. The philosopher's goal became one of inner alignment, refining one's own soul to become a mirror of the celestial order, thus becoming a true microcosm of the macrocosm. In this grand tradition, inspired by Plato's brilliant blueprint, the seeker who attained this star wisdom wasn't just an observer of the heavens, but an active participant in the cosmic order, a human vessel through which the perfect and eternal could finally manifest on earth. Yet, even as Plato's philosopher king sought truth through pure reason, another form of divine knowledge captivated the ancient Greek world, one that came not from calm contemplation, but from a sacred, frenzied communion with the god Apollo himself. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, in a place the Greeks believed to be the very center of the world, sat the sanctuary of Delphi. Here, for over 1,000 years, the fate of kings, the founding of colonies, and the outcomes of wars were determined by the utterances of a single woman, the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. She was no ordinary priestess. She was the mortal vessel for the voice of the sun god, a human bridge between the earthly and the divine, and her prophecies were intimately woven into the celestial fabric of the cosmos. Before each prophetic session, the elaborate ritual began not with prayer alone, but with a careful observation of the heavens. The priests of the temple, known as the Hosioi, were skilled astronomers in their own right. They would scrutinize the sky for signs and omens, ensuring the celestial conditions were favorable for the god to speak. Only under a specific alignment of stars and planets, and only on one appointed day each month would the sacred ceremony proceed. This was because the ancient Greeks saw no separation between the movements of the heavens and the will of the gods. The cosmos was a living, breathing embodiment of divine order. Apollo was not just the god of prophecy, he was also the god of light and reason, often associated with the sun itself. To consult his oracle was, in a very real sense, to seek counsel from the celestial sphere. The woman chosen to serve as the Pythia would then undergo a series of purifications. She would bathe in the sacred Castalian spring, a ritual act of cleansing that was both physical and spiritual. She would drink from a different sacred spring or perhaps chew laurel leaves, the plant sacred to Apollo, then descended into a secluded, underground chamber within the temple, the Aditon. Here she would take her seat on a tall, three-legged tripod cauldron, positioned directly over a fissure in the rock from which intoxicating vapors were said to rise. Ancient sources describe these gases as a sweet-smelling pneuma, a sacred breath from the earth. As she inhaled these fumes, the Pythia would gradually slip into an ecstatic trance, a state of divine madness or mania that was believed to be the moment Apollo entered her body. Her utterances in this altered state were often wild, incoherent, and terrifying to behold. They were not delivered in clear, poetic verse. Instead, they were the raw, unfiltered cries of possession, guttural moans, fragmented words, and frantic ravings. It was the role of the attending priests to translate these chaotic sounds into the elegant, often cryptic hexameter verses that were then delivered to the anxious supplicants waiting outside. A question about a military campaign might be met with a riddle about a wooden wall. A query about marriage might result in a warning about a lioness. The answers were never straightforward, always requiring interpretation, which itself was a form of wisdom. For centuries, this was understood as a purely mystical phenomenon. However, modern geology has offered a startling scientific explanation that deepens rather than diminishes the mystery. In the 1980s, an extensive multidisciplinary study of the Delphi site confirmed the accounts of the ancient writers. The region is a seismic hotspot crisscrossed by two major fault lines that intersect directly beneath the temple. Researchers hypothesize that these faults could have channeled petrochemical gases like ethylene, which has a sweet odor and is known to induce a trance-like, euphoric, and disoriented state in humans. While later studies have debated the specific gas involved, the core finding stands. The geological reality of Delphi provided a tangible, physical mechanism for the Pythia's altered consciousness. This doesn't explain away the oracle's power. It reveals a profound synergy between the earthly and the divine. The ancient Greeks built their most sacred site of communication with the god of light precisely at a location where the very earth breathed a substance that opened the human mind to visions. This breathtaking intersection of geology, astronomy, and divine possession made the oracle of Delphi far more than a fortune teller. She was the living symbol of a universe where everything was connected, the stars above, the earth below, and the human spirit in between. Her prophecies shaped the course of Western history, guiding explorers to new lands and lawmakers to new constitutions. She was the ultimate testament to the ancient belief that the cosmos was not silent but constantly communicating, and that sometimes it required a human voice lost in divine frenzy to translate its message. But perhaps the most enduring and widespread legacy of the Magi is the story that has captivated billions for 2 millennia, their journey to Bethlehem. The Gospel of Matthew describes them as Magoi, a po-Anatolon Magi from the east who arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." This single sentence is a profound testament to their established reputation. They were not local Jewish scribes but foreign experts, men of such renown that their audience, including King Herod himself, took their celestial pronouncement with deadly seriousness. Their quest was the ultimate expression of their vocation, reading a specific celestial sign, interpreting it as the announcement of a divine king, and undertaking a long, perilous pilgrimage to pay homage. The star they followed was not seen as a simple astrological prediction of birth, but as an active, guiding signal, moving before them until it stopped over the very place where the child was. This narrative perfectly encapsulates their perceived role as the master decoders of the heavens, the men who could discern a singular, divine message written in the language of the stars and who were compelled to act upon that communication, bridging the vast gap between the cosmic and the earthly with their faith and their footsteps. Yet even as the divine frenzy of the oracle faded into history, a new kind of voice emerged from the ancient world, one that sought to understand the cosmos not through possession, but through the serene and disciplined power of human reason. In the bustling, brilliant, and increasingly volatile city of Alexandria during the 4th century, one figure stood as a luminous beacon of this intellectual ideal, Hypatia. More than 1,000 years after the Pythia sat upon her tripod, Hypatia ascended to the chair of philosophy at the city's famed museum and library, but her classroom was her temple and mathematics was her sacred language. She was the daughter of Theon, a renowned mathematician and astronomer, and she surpassed him, becoming a legend in her own right, not as a vessel for a god, but as a master of the celestial sciences that reveal the divine order of the universe itself. As a devoted Neoplatonist, Hypatia inherited and taught the philosophical tradition that flowed from Plato and Plotinus. For her, the pursuit of astronomy and mathematics was the highest form of spiritual exercise. She taught that the physical cosmos, with its perfectly orbiting planets and stately dance of stars, was a magnificent reflection of a higher, perfect, and intelligible reality. To calculate the motion of a planet was not a dry, technical task, it was an act of communion. By comprehending the mathematical laws that govern the heavens, the human soul could begin to purify itself of earthly confusion and start its ascent back toward unity with the divine source of all things, the One. Her lectures were legendary, attracting the most powerful and ambitious men of the Eastern Roman Empire, pagan and Christian alike, who flocked to her to learn not just geometry, but how to live a virtuous life in harmony with the rational cosmos. She was, by all historical accounts, a person of immense character, a woman of stunning intellect, profound eloquence, and remarkable personal virtue who moved through the city with a dignified authority rarely afforded to women in the ancient world. She edited her father's pivotal commentary on Ptolemy's Almagest, the great work that placed the Earth at the center of the universe, and she is credited with inventing the astrolabe and a hydroscope, tools for measuring the stars and the density of liquids. But her greatest instrument was her mind. She embodied the Neoplatonic ideal that the philosopher's life was one of contemplation and public service, using reason to navigate the tumultuous political waters of her time. She advised Orst, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, and was caught in the deadly crossfire of a power struggle between the imperial government and the rising authority of the Christian bishop, Cyril. This collision between the old world of philosophical reason and the new world of militant faith culminated in a horrifying act of violence that forever sealed her legacy. In the year 415, during the solemn period of Lent, a mob of zealots incited by Peter the Reader, a devoted follower of Bishop Cyril, dragged Hypatia from her chariot as she traveled through the city. They stripped her naked and used broken pottery and tiles to scrape the flesh from her bones in a grotesque parody of philosophical purification. Her mutilated remains were burned, a final effort to erase her influence. Her murder was not merely the killing of a brilliant woman. It was a symbolic assassination of the classical ideals she represented: rational inquiry, religious tolerance, and the fearless pursuit of knowledge. It marked a definitive turning point, the moment the light of Alexandria's great library began to be extinguished by the shadows of dogmatic certainty. Hypatia's tragic end, however, failed to erase her light. Instead, it transformed her into an eternal symbol. She became a martyr for reason, a powerful reminder of the peril that awaits a society when it chooses dogma over dialogue and violence over virtue. Her life's work stands as a testament to a profound and beautiful belief that by studying the heavens, by listening to the silent music of their mathematical harmony, we do not move away from the divine but closer to its very essence. She taught that the path to the stars was paved with geometry and contemplation, a journey of the mind that could elevate the human soul to its cosmic home. From the sun-drenched intellectual battlegrounds of Alexandria, we journey now into the misty forests and rugged highlands of ancient Britain, to a figure woven from history and myth, a wizard whose very essence was intertwined with the celestial dance, Merlin. While Hypatia sought cosmic truth through the clarity of geometry, Merlin's power flowed from a wilder, more primal source, a deep, intuitive communion with the natural and celestial world. He stands as the archetypal Celtic cosmic wizard, a prophet and magician whose legendary foresight was not a gift of whimsical magic, but a science derived from a lifetime of listening to the whispers of the stars. The Merlin we recognize from Arthurian legend is actually a fusion of two distinct figures from older Welsh literature. The first is Myrddin Wyllt, or Merlin the Wild, a madman and prophet driven insane by the horrors of battle who fled into the Caledonian forest. Living among the beasts, he learned the language of the animals, the secrets of the plants, and the movements of the heavens, gaining the ability to see the future. The second is Ambrosius Aurelianus, a Romano-British war leader and prophet from whose story the tale of the boy Merlin prophesying the red and white dragons beneath Vortigern's tower is drawn. Geoffrey of Monmouth, the 12th century cleric and chronicler, masterfully blended these two traditions into the single, powerful character of Merlin Ambrosius, advisor to King Arthur. In Geoffrey's History of the Kings of Britain and the subsequent Vita Merlini, The Life of Merlin, we are given a vivid portrait of a man whose power is explicitly celestial. He is described as spending entire nights outdoors, charting the courses of the planets and the shimmering paths of comets, speaking with the stars as if they were old friends confiding in him. This was not the formalized astronomy of Ptolemy. It was a druidic tradition, a sacred knowledge system where the sky was a living, breathing text. The ancient Celts held a profound belief in the interconnectedness of all things. The land, the sea, the sky, and the spirit world were not separate realms but fluidly connected layers of a single reality. The Druids, the intellectual and priestly class of Celtic society, were renowned by Roman commentators like Julius Caesar for their extensive knowledge, which took 20 years to memorize as it was forbidden to be written down. Central to this knowledge was astronomy. They used the stars not only for practical purposes like navigation and calendar keeping for seasonal festivals like Samhain and Beltane, but also for divination. They believed that the cosmos was a grand, dynamic map of fate, and by reading its signs, the appearance of a comet, the slow conjunction of planets, the sudden flash of a meteor, one could discern the will of the gods and the trajectory of events to come. Merlin is the ultimate literary embodiment of this druidic stargazer. His prophecies, as recorded in medieval texts, are filled with celestial imagery. He doesn't just predict a battle, he foresees it in the violent clash of two stars, He doesn't just warn of a king's death, he reads it in the dimming of a planet. His famous madness, his time spent in the wilderness, is portrayed not as a loss of sanity but as an expansion of consciousness, a necessary shattering of the human ego to allow the vast, impersonal voice of the cosmos to speak through him. He becomes a conduit, a human antenna tuned to the frequency of the heavens. His magic is the application of this cosmic knowledge. He uses his understanding of astral cycles to choose the most propitious time for Arthur's conception and his coronation, and legend says he designed the round table itself as a geomantic symbol reflecting the circular order of the zodiac. This blending of Celtic tradition with the medieval cosmology of Geoffrey's time created a uniquely powerful figure. The medieval worldview was one of a great chain of being, a hierarchical universe stretching from the foot of God's throne down to the basest elements of Earth. The celestial spheres, perfect and immutable, govern the sublunary world of change and decay beneath the moon. Merlin's power lay in his ability to navigate this hierarchy. By understanding the influences flowing down from the stars and planets, he could manipulate events in the world below. He didn't break the laws of nature, he simply understood them at their deepest, most cosmic level and knew how to work within their flow. He was the master of astral magic, a concept that would fascinate scholars for centuries to come. In the figure of Merlin, the wild intuition of the Celtic seer and the structured cosmology of the medieval world found perfect harmony, creating an enduring legend of a man who did not just look at the stars, but who conversed with them and in their silent language read the destiny of a kingdom. While Merlin's prophecies echoed through the forests of Britain, a far more systematic and enduring conversation with the cosmos was unfolding under the vast desert skies of the Islamic world. As Europe languished in its so-called Dark Ages, a magnificent flowering of science, philosophy, and art was taking place across an empire that stretched from Spain to India, a period we now know as the Islamic Golden Age. This was an era of breathtaking intellectual curiosity, where caliphs built grand institutions of learning like Baghdad's House of Wisdom, actively seeking out and translating the knowledge of the ancient Greeks, Persians, and Indians. But these scholars were not mere librarians. They were brilliant innovators who took the works of Plato and Aristotle and fused them with their own profound spiritual insights, creating a unique and powerful world where the heavens were seen as a vast, rational, and deeply communicative creation of the divine. At the heart of this endeavor were philosophers who are not household names in the West, but who fundamentally shaped the course of human thought. Thinkers like Al-Kindi, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, who argued that the universe was a perfectly ordered unity that could be understood through mathematics, and Al-Farabi, who wrote extensively on the perfect heavenly city governed by philosophical principles. They embraced the Greek concept of a cosmos governed by natural law, but placed it firmly within an Islamic framework, viewing the orderly movements of the planets not as a challenge to God's power, but as the ultimate expression of his perfect and consistent will. For them, to study astronomy was an act of worship, a way of tracing the fingerprints of the Creator in the intricate clockwork of the spheres. This philosophical groundwork blossomed into a truly breathtaking cosmic vision with the rise of Islamic mysticism or Sufism. And no one represents this synthesis better than the towering figure of Ibn Arabi. Born in 12th century Muslim Spain, Ibn Arabi was a mystic of the highest order, a man who experienced profound visions and wrote vast, complex works exploring the nature of divinity and creation. Central to his cosmology was the concept of the oneness of being, the idea that all of existence is a manifestation of the one ultimate reality, which is God. The entire universe, from the highest celestial sphere to the smallest grain of sand, is an emanation of the divine names and attributes, constantly being renewed at every moment. In this view, the cosmos is not a static machine, but a living, breathing, dynamic expression of God's own self-revelation. This is where the idea of celestial communication becomes utterly fascinating. Ibn Arabi and other Sufi masters taught that the planets and stars were not lifeless rocks of fire, but were endowed with conscious spiritual intelligences. These celestial beings, these angels of the spheres, were the governors of the physical universe, tasked with carrying out the divine command. Their movement was their worship, and the sublime mathematical harmony of their orbits, the very music of the spheres that Pythagoras had imagined, was their eternal prayer and their language. The perfect ratios and intervals that defined their paths were a form of divine speech, a continuous cosmic recitation that maintained the existence of all things. A human who could purify their heart and still the noise of their ego could, in moments of deep contemplation, begin to perceive this celestial symphony. It was not heard with the physical ear, but understood by the innermost spirit, the Kalb, as a direct infusion of knowledge and light from the higher intelligences themselves. This was not a rejection of science, it was its transcendence. The same astronomers who calculated planetary tables with stunning accuracy, who named the stars we still use today like Aldebaran and Betelgeuse, and who built observatories like the one at Marrakech, often saw their mathematical work as the first step on a spiritual path. The equations were the grammar of the language the stars were speaking. By mastering the physical laws, one could prepare the soul to receive the deeper spiritual truths that those laws conveyed. This rich blend of rigorous observation and mystical insight did not stay in the East. Through the cultural gateways of Al-Andalus in Spain and Sicily, these ideas flowed into medieval Europe. The works of Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd, known as Averroes, became foundational texts in European universities, reigniting the flame of Aristotelian philosophy, but now colored with the profound spiritual depth of their Islamic commentators. This transmission was the essential spark that would help ignite the European Renaissance, providing the intellectual tools and the cosmic inspiration for figures like Dante, who modeled his Divine Comedy on Islamic accounts of heavenly ascents, and later for astronomers like Kepler, who remained convinced that the heavens sang a harmonic, geometric music. The legacy of these Arabian Night astronomers is a powerful reminder that the greatest leaps in human understanding often occur not when science and spirit are at odds, but when they walk hand in hand, gazing up at the same stars and listening for the same silent, majestic music. Yet, even as the intellectual traditions of the Islamic world were being transmitted to the West, a very different kind of cosmic voice was emerging from within the cloistered silence of a Rhineland monastery. Her name was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, composer, theologian, and polymath, whose life and work stand as one of the most astonishing examples of a human being who claimed to receive direct visionary communication from the divine source of the cosmos itself. While the scholars of the House of Wisdom sought truth through reason and translation, Hildegard's knowledge arrived in a blaze of unearthly light and sound, a total sensory experience she called the umbra viventis lucis, the shadow of the living light. From a very young age, Hildegard was gifted, or perhaps burdened, with powerful visionary experiences. She described these not as dreams or vague feelings, but as waking visions where her physical senses were overwhelmed while her inner eyes were open. She retained full consciousness, yet she saw and heard things that were utterly beyond the mundane world. For much of her life, she kept these experiences private, fearing they were a form of weakness or even demonic trickery. It wasn't until she was 42 years old, after she had become a respected magistra of her Benedictine community, that a terrifying vision commanded her to finally write down and illustrate everything she saw and heard. The command, as she recorded it, came with a force that left her bedridden and ill. Write what you see and hear. The result was her first and most famous work, Civias, short for Cito Vias Domini, or Know the Ways of the Lord. This monumental book is far more than a theological treatise. It is a detailed field report from the edge of the divine, Within its pages, Hildegard describes 26 complex visions, each accompanied by her own instructions for intricate illustrations, often drawn by the nuns under her direct supervision. The visions are not presented as allegories or metaphors. For Hildegard, they were factual, revelatory descriptions of the spiritual and cosmic architecture of reality, shown to her by God. Her role was not that of an interpreter but of a scribe, a faithful secretary to the divine. The cosmology that emerges from Scivia's and her later works like Liber Divinorum Operum, the Book of Divine Works, is breathtaking in its complexity and beauty. She did not envision a simple heaven above and earth below. Instead, she saw the universe as a series of interconnected, egg-shaped cosmic spheres. At the center was the earth, stationary and composed of the 4 classical elements. Surrounding it was a sphere of airy wind, then a sphere of aqueous cloud and pure water, and finally the outermost massive sphere of ethereal fire which contained the stars. Woven through this cosmic egg were the paths of the planets, the moon, and the sun, all held in their places and moved by the will and love of God. What makes a cosmology so unique is its vibrant, organic vitality. The entire cosmos for Hildegard was alive and constantly singing. The planets were not cold, dead rocks but luminous, intelligent beings moved by angelic forces, each emitting its own unique musical tone as it traveled its path. This celestial symphony was a continuous act of praise, and humanity, positioned at the center of this creation, was designed to be the conductor of this cosmic choir. The human soul, or anima, was a spark of the divine fire, a microcosm that mirrored the macrocosm. Our very body and spirit were fashioned from the same elements and energies that composed the stars, making us living mirrors of the universe. When a human being lived a life of virtue and praise, they literally brought the entire cosmos into greater harmony. Conversely, sin and disharmony in human life created a spiritual dissonance that echoed through all of creation. Hildegard's descriptions are filled with striking, almost psychedelic imagery. She writes of sparkling gemstones, wheels of fire, and human forms of dazzling light. She speaks of hearing the music of the spheres not as a mathematical concept but as a literal, overwhelming chorus of joy. Her subsequent work as a composer was a direct result of these visions. Her hauntingly beautiful liturgical music, such as the Symphonia Harmoniae Celestium Revelationum Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations, was her attempt to bring a fragment of that heavenly symphony down to earth for her community to experience. Far from being dismissed as a madwoman, Hildegard was validated by the highest authority of her time. She sent a portion of her Scivias to the great Bernard of Clairvaux, who brought it to the attention of Pope Eugenius III. The Pope read her work aloud at the Synod of Trier and officially approved her writings, granting her the unprecedented permission to continue documenting her revelations. This papal sanction transformed her from an obscure nun into an international celebrity, a trusted prophetess whom emperors and kings sought for counsel. Hildegard of Bingen became the Sibyl of the Rhine, a woman who spoke with an authority that transcended her gender and her station because she claimed her words were not her own, but those of the living light, the divine architect of the cosmic egg in which we all reside. Her legacy is a powerful testament to the medieval belief that the universe was a coherent, meaningful, and communicative whole, and that a prepared human soul could indeed become a conduit for its deepest secrets. Yet for all his forward-looking celestial calculations, Nostradamus anchored his method in a deeply medieval and mystical practice. After his long nights of astrological work, he would retire to his study, take a seat upon a brass tripod, a deliberate echo of the Delphic oracle, and enter a trance-like state. He described descending into a kind of waking dream where a subtle spirit of fire would illuminate his mind, allowing him to perceive the great events, sad and prodigious, that the celestial configurations foretold. This blend of rigorous calculation and ecstatic vision was at the very core of his process. The math provided the map, but the trance provided the vehicle to travel through time itself. He would then translate these fleeting, fiery impressions into the dense, poetic quatrains that make up his prophecies, writing them down in a frenzied burst of inspiration. The resulting verses are a labyrinth of multilingual puns, anagrams, archaic vocabulary, and ambiguous symbolism, deliberately obfuscated, he claimed, to avoid persecution from the religious authorities of his day. This cryptographic style is precisely what has allowed his work to remain perpetually relevant, as each generation finds new events that seem to fit his ancient, malleable words. From the rise of Napoleon and Hitler to the tragedies of 9/11 and the predictions of a Third World War, the quatrains serve as a cosmic Rorschach test, reflecting back the anxieties and events of the era interpreting them. Whether one views him as a true seer, a clever fraud, or a brilliant artist who tapped into the archetypal patterns of human history, Michel de Nostradame endures as the ultimate legend of astrological prophecy, a man who sat at the crossroads of science and spirit, using the stars as his portal to the future. Yet, even as Nostradamus was weaving his cryptic prophecies, a very different kind of stargazer was emerging in the heart of Renaissance Europe, one who believed the true language of the cosmos was not found in cryptic verses, but in the painstaking, precise measurement of the stars themselves. Meet Tycho Brahe, the flamboyant, brilliant, and often temperamental Danish nobleman who would become the greatest observational astronomer of the pre-telescopic age. His life was a paradox of rigid scientific discipline and deeply held mystical belief. A man who wore a silver prosthetic nose after losing his own in a duel over mathematics, and who kept a pet moose that tragically died after drinking too much beer and falling down a staircase. But beneath this eccentric exterior was a mind utterly consumed by a singular mission: to prove that the heavens were not the realm of messy, unpredictable change, but a perfect, divine clockwork, and that by mapping its gears with unprecedented accuracy, he could reveal the hand of God. Brahe's life's work was ignited by a celestial event that shook the foundations of the 16th century world. In 1572, a brilliant new star, a supernova, blazed into existence in the constellation of Cassiopeia. To the Aristotelian scholars of the time, the heavens beyond the moon were supposed to be immutable and perfect, a realm of fixed, eternal stars. This new star was an impossibility, a heresy against the established cosmic order. While others panicked or tried to explain it away, the 26-year-old Tycho did what he did best. He measured it. With his own ingeniously designed instruments, massive sextants and quadrants crafted from brass and wood, he meticulously tracked its position and brightness for over a year until it finally faded from view. His conclusions were revolutionary. This star had no measurable parallax, meaning it was not a nearby atmospheric phenomenon, but was located far beyond the moon, deep in the celestial realm. The heavens were not unchanging, they were alive, dynamic, and capable of creation. This discovery made him a scientific celebrity across Europe. His fame and his radical findings soon reached the ears of King Frederick II of Denmark. Eager to keep this brilliant mind in his kingdom and bring prestige to his reign, the king made Tycho an offer he couldn't refuse: the entire island of Ven, located in the sound between Denmark and Sweden, along with a vast fortune to build a research institute the likes of which the world had never seen. Tycho accepted, and thus Uraniborg, the castle of the heavens, began to rise. This was not just an observatory, it was a temple to celestial science, a sprawling palace library, laboratory workshop surrounded by magnificent Renaissance gardens. At its heart was Uraniborg, the castle of the stars, an underground observatory where his colossal instruments were mounted on solid bedrock to eliminate even the slightest vibration. Here, for over 20 years, Tycho and a team of assistants and students conducted a continuous, nightly census of the sky. They charted the positions of the planets and hundreds of stars with an accuracy that was 10 times better than any achieved before. Every measurement was meticulously recorded, creating a treasure trove of empirical data that would become the bedrock of the scientific revolution. For Tycho, this obsessive data collection was far more than a scientific exercise. It was a form of worship. He was a devout Lutheran who believed that God had created two holy books, the Bible, which revealed his will for humanity, and the Book of Nature, which revealed his divine artistry. By reading the second book through precise measurement, he believed he was glorifying the Creator and uncovering the sublime geometric order he had inscribed in the heavens. Tycho rejected both the ancient Earth-centered Ptolemaic system, which he found mathematically clumsy, and the new Sun-centered Copernican model, which he felt violated both physics and scripture. Instead, he devised his own hybrid system, the Tychonic model, where the planets orbited the Sun, but the Sun itself orbited a stationary Earth. This clever compromise allowed him to accept the mathematical elegance of Copernicus while preserving a central, unmoving Earth, which aligned with his interpretation of biblical passages and the common-sense experience of a stable ground beneath his feet. This immense, precise, and yet incomplete cosmic vision needed a final, crucial ingredient: a mathematical mind brilliant enough to decipher the patterns hidden within the mountains of data. That mind belonged to a young, brilliant, and mystically inclined German mathematician named Johannes Kepler. After Tycho's falling out with the new Danish king Christian IV forced him to leave Uraniborg, he eventually became the imperial mathematician to Emperor Rudolf II in Prague. It was here that he hired the struggling Kepler as his assistant. Their partnership was one of the most fateful and fraught in scientific history. Tycho, the arrogant, empirical aristocrat, hoarded his data like gold, doling it out to Kepler piecemeal to test his theories. Kepler, the frail, theoretical genius, was driven by a profound belief that the universe was constructed by God according to pure geometric harmony. He desperately needed Tycho's unparalleled data to prove his ideas. After Tycho's sudden and rather bizarre death in 1601, legend says a ruptured bladder from refusing to leave a banquet to relieve himself. Out of politeness, Kepler inherited the title of imperial mathematician, and after a long struggle, full access to the precious observational records. Armed with Tycho's data on the planet Mars, data so precise that it revealed a tiny 8-minute of arc discrepancy between its observed position and all existing models, Kepler was able to tear down the ancient edifice of perfect circular orbits. He discovered that the planets move in ellipses with the Sun at one focus, and that they sweep out equal areas in equal times. These first two laws of planetary motion, published in 1609, were a direct product of Tycho's empirical rigor meeting Kepler's mystical mathematical intuition. Tycho's belief in a communicative, ordered cosmos was proven correct, though in a way he never could have imagined. His legacy is the ultimate testament to the power of looking, of measuring, of patiently listening to the stars with instruments instead of intuition, and in doing so, providing the raw material for a revolution that would forever change our conversation with the universe. But if Tycho Brahe's legacy was one of meticulous measurement, his successor's journey would take a far more perilous and philosophical turn, pushing the very boundaries of what it meant to conceive of the cosmos. As the 16th century drew to a close, a different kind of stargazer emerged, one who looked not through brass instruments but with the fierce, unflinching eye of the mind's own reason. His name was Giordano Bruno, a former Dominican friar from the sun-baked town of Nola in the Kingdom of Naples, and he would become one of history's most celebrated and tragic martyrs for a cosmic perspective so vast it shattered the medieval world picture entirely. Bruno's story begins not in an observatory but in a monastery library. As a young man, his voracious intellect quickly chafed against the rigid orthodoxy of his order. He was drawn not only to theology but to the hidden, forbidden streams of Hermeticism and Neoplatonism that had been rediscovered during the Renaissance. These ancient texts spoke of a universe alive with divine spirit, where the human mind, a spark of the infinite, could achieve a direct mystical union with the cosmos. For Bruno, this was a revelation far more profound than any church doctrine. He fled his monastic life and began a decades-long, restless exile across Europe, a penniless scholar lecturing at the great universities in Geneva, Paris, London, and Prague. Everywhere he went, leaving a trail of controversy and awe in his wake. His radical ideas were not based on new telescopic observations. Galileo had not yet pointed his instrument to the heavens, but on a breathtaking philosophical and intuitive leap. Drawing upon the ancient Greek atomist Democritus and the revolutionary ideas of Nicolaus Copernicus, Bruno argued for a universe that was infinite. The sun was not the center of a finite sphere of stars. It was merely one star among an infinite number of others, each with its own planets, each of those planets a potential world teeming with its own life. In his magnificent dialogues like On the Infinite Universe and Worlds, he described a cosmos without boundary or center, a limitless expanse where the stars were other suns, so distant that their apparent smallness was merely an illusion of perspective. This was a staggering, terrifying, and glorious vision that stripped Earth and humanity of any privileged position in creation. For the Catholic Church, still reeling from the Protestant Reformation and fiercely defending its geocentric worldview, Bruno's teachings were a multi-layered heresy. He denied the Trinity, questioned the divinity of Christ, and practiced the art of memory, a mystical technique many considered magical and demonic. But his most dangerous idea was his infinite, pluralistic universe. It directly attacked the core of Aristotelian physics, which the Church had adopted as its own, and it rendered the entire Christian narrative of salvation with Christ's sacrifice for humanity on a central Earth seemingly provincial and absurd. If there were countless other worlds, did Christ die for each of them? Were there other Adams, other Eves, other falls from grace? Bruno's cosmology didn't just suggest other planets, it implicitly demanded a complete theological overhaul the Church was utterly unwilling to entertain. After years on the run, Bruno made the fatal mistake of returning to Italy, lured to Venice by a nobleman who promised patronage but instead betrayed him to the Venetian Inquisition. What followed was an 8-year-long ordeal of imprisonment and trial, first in Venice and then in Rome, as the Roman Inquisition sought to force him to recant his numerous heresies. Bruno, a man of immense courage and conviction, refused. He drew a firm distinction between his philosophical beliefs, which he argued were matters of reason, and matters of faith. He would recant errors in theological interpretation, but he would not deny what his reason and his profound spiritual intuition told him was the true nature of God's magnificent creation. The trial became a brutal stalemate. The inquisitors demanded submission. Bruno offered complex philosophical defenses. Finally, after seeing that his arguments would never be heard on their own terms, he took a final, defiant stand. He refused to recant anything at all. The Inquisition, out of patience, declared him an impenitent, pertinacious, and obstinate heretic. His books were placed on the index of forbidden texts, and he was handed over to the secular authorities with the customary plea that they show him mercy by executing him without the shedding of blood, a grim euphemism for being burned alive at the stake. On February 17, 1600, in the Campo de' Fiori in Rome, Giordano Bruno was executed. Legend says that as the flames rose around him, he turned his face away from the crucifix offered to him, choosing to die with his eyes fixed not on a symbol of earthly salvation, but on the infinite heavens he had spent his life contemplating. Bruno's death was not the end of his ideas, it was their baptism by fire. He became a powerful symbol centuries later for the freedom of thought and the relentless pursuit of knowledge against the oppression of dogma. While he was not a scientist in the empirical sense of Bloch or Kepler, he was a visionary philosopher whose intuitive grasp of cosmic structure proved to be astonishingly prescient. His infinite universe, his countless suns and habitable worlds, all now stand as established facts of modern astronomy. he understood that the stars were other suns long before spectroscopy proved it. He is remembered not for the accuracy of his methods, but for the breathtaking grandeur of his vision, a cosmic perspective that embraced infinity and granted every star its own potential family of worlds, forever expanding humanity's place in a universe without end. While the fiery death of Giordano Bruno in Rome sent a chilling message across Europe, a very different kind of cosmic conversation was taking place in the relative safety of Elizabethan England, led by a man who was both a celebrated intellectual and a feared occultist. John Dee was a figure of dazzling contradictions, a world-renowned mathematician and cartographer who advised explorers on their voyages to the New World, and at the very same time, a devoted alchemist and crystal gazer who spent decades attempting to converse with angels. He served as the personal astrologer and scientific advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, yet he believed his most important work was not for any earthly monarch, but for the divine kingdom, decoding the language of the angels to understand the hidden architecture of God's creation. Dee's vast intellect was apparent from his youth. He entered Cambridge University at the age of 15 and soon became a fellow at Trinity College, where his passion for learning was so intense that he was known to spend 18 hours a day in study. He traveled across Europe, lecturing on the geometry of Euclid and meeting with the greatest minds of the era, including the cartographer Gerardus Mercator. Queen Elizabeth, a highly educated monarch herself, recognized his genius and called upon him to cast the astrological chart for her coronation, choosing the most propitious day and hour for the ceremony to ensure a long and prosperous reign. He became her trusted confidant, advising her on matters of state, science, and even the potential of establishing a British Empire, a term he is often credited with coining. For Dee, mathematics and navigation were not separate from magic. They were all part of a unified system of divine knowledge, a way of reading the sacred geometry that God had used to build the universe. But Dee's ambition soared far beyond mapping coastlines or advising on policy. He was consumed by a profound and haunting question. If the universe was indeed a divine mathematical construct, then who better to explain its secrets than the very architects and builders who worked for the Creator? He became convinced that the angels, the intelligent, non-corporeal beings who moved the planets and stars, could be contacted directly, and that they would be willing to share their perfect knowledge with a worthy human intermediary. The problem was finding such a person, for Dee believed he himself lacked the innate spiritual gift of clear vision. He needed a scryer, a skilled medium who could gaze into a shoestone, a crystal ball or mirror, and perceive the angelic entities, acting as a living telephone line between the mortal and the divine. He found his instrument in a disreputable and volatile character named Edward Kelly. Kelly was a convicted forger who had allegedly had his ears cropped as punishment, and he was widely suspected of being a fraud. Yet when Dee partnered with him in 1582, Kelly proved astonishingly effective. In intense daily sessions that would last for years, Dee would kneel in prayer at his altar, calling upon the angelic forces, while Kelly would stare deep into the shoestone, describing the visions that unfolded. Dee would meticulously record every word, every command, and every bizarre symbol that Kelly relayed. Through Kelly, a host of angels made contact, chief among them a being named Uriel, and then a maddeningly complex spirit named Madame. They revealed to Dee a complete celestial language which he called angelical or the Enochian tongue, complete with its own alphabet, grammar, and syntax. They claimed this was the original pre-Babel language of Adam, which he used to name all things in Eden and commune directly with God and the angels. The angels also delivered a sophisticated system of magic based on vast, intricate symbolic tables often scrawled on grids known as the Great Table of the Earth or the Holy Table of Practice. These tables were covered in complex seals, names of angels, and astrological sigils, and they were meant to be used as a kind of cosmic control panel. By properly using these tables and speaking the Enochian calls or keys, a series of 48 powerful incantations, the magician could theoretically command the angels to reveal hidden knowledge, travel astrally through the 30 ethers or layers of reality, and even influence events on a global scale. For Dee, this was the ultimate science, a technology of the spirit that could unlock the secrets of nature, heal the schisms in Christianity, and usher in a new golden age for England and the world. His actions were not those of a deluded man playing with superstition. They were the desperate efforts of a Renaissance scholar trying to build a bridge between the emerging empirical world and the ancient world of spirit. He saw his angelic conversations as a direct extension of his mathematical and astronomical studies. Just as he used geometry to map the Earth, he would use the Enochian system to map the heavens. The tragic irony of his life is that this grand cosmic project was ultimately his undoing. His prolonged absences from court, his association with the dubious Kelly, and the very nature of his occult practices eventually led to his fall from grace. He returned to England after years abroad conducting these sessions to find his magnificent library at Mortlake ransacked and his reputation in tatters. He died in poverty, a forgotten figure, his immense contributions to science overshadowed by his esoteric pursuits. Yet his legacy endured, hidden in the coded pages of his manuscripts, waiting for future generations to rediscover the story of the Elizabethan magus who dared to ask the angels for a user's manual to the universe. Yet even as John Dee was attempting to decipher the angelic language of creation through a crystal ball, a revolution was brewing that would provide a far more powerful instrument for understanding the cosmos. In the bustling workshops of Venice and the lecture halls of Padua, a brilliant and fiercely determined Italian mathematician was about to turn a novelty item into a window on infinity. His name was Galileo Galilei, and his story is not merely one of scientific discovery, but of a profound spiritual conviction that the path to God was paved with mathematics and direct observation of his works. The spark was a rumor. In 1609, Galileo heard tales of a Dutch spectacle maker who had combined lenses in a tube to make distant objects appear closer. With his characteristic genius for practical invention, Galileo rapidly improved upon the design, grinding his own lenses and constructing a telescope that could magnify objects 20, then 30 times. But unlike others who saw the device as a mere toy for terrestrial spying, Galileo did something utterly transformative. He pointed it at the night sky. What he saw there, meticulously recorded in his short but earth-shattering book Sidereus Nuncius, or The Starry Messenger, would forever dismantle the comfortable, finite cosmos of Aristotle that had dominated Western thought for 2 millennia. The heavens, as revealed by Galileo's telescope, were nothing like the ancient philosophers had described. The moon was not a perfect, smooth sphere of quintessential ether. It was a world with mountains, valleys, and craters that cast shadows, a landscape as rugged and imperfect as our own. The planet Jupiter was attended by 4 moons of its own, clear proof that not everything in creation circled the Earth. The Milky Way resolved from a faint mist into a countless multitude of individual stars, revealing a universe of staggering depth and scale. Most shocking of all, the planet Venus exhibited phases just like our moon, an observation that could only be explained if it were orbiting the sun, not the Earth. Here was irrefutable visual evidence that supported the Copernican model. The Earth was dethroned from its central position. It was just another planet circling the sun. For the established Aristotelian scholars within the university system and the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church, these discoveries were not exciting revelations but dangerous heresies. They attacked Galileo on multiple fronts. Some refused to even look through the telescope, dismissing it as an instrument of deception that created optical illusions. Others argued that even if the observations were real, they were irrelevant. truth was found not in fallible sense perception but in logical deduction from first principles established by Aristotle and sanctified by church doctrine. The idea of a moving earth also seemed to contradict several passages of scripture, such as the verse where Joshua commands the sun to stand still, not the earth. Galileo found himself in a battle not just against outdated science, but against an entire philosophical and theological worldview that felt deeply threatened by his discoveries. What is often overlooked in this famous conflict is the deeply religious nature of Galileo's own motivation. He was a devout Catholic, not a secular revolutionary. His defense was not against religion, but for a different way of understanding God's revelation. He famously wrote that the Holy Scripture tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. For Galileo, God had written two books, the Book of Scripture, which revealed his will for human salvation, and the Book of Nature, which revealed his magnificent artistry in creating the universe. Crucially, he argued that the language of this second book was mathematics. Geometry, algebra, and the laws of motion were the divine syntax, the code through which God had constructed reality. To study physics and astronomy was therefore a supremely pious act, a form of prayerful contemplation that brought the human mind closer to the mind of the Creator. He saw the mathematical harmony he discovered in falling bodies and planetary orbits as a direct glimpse into God's rational, orderly intellect. This perspective framed his telescopic work as a form of divine communication. By building his instrument and training it on the heavens, he was not challenging God. He was learning to read God's other book more clearly. He was, in a very real sense, listening to the stars with a new ear, and they were speaking back in a language of geometry and light. This is why he titled his book The Starry Messenger. He believed he was merely the humble delivery boy, conveying a message from the heavens that had been waiting millennia for someone to develop the tools to receive it. The tension he created was not between science and religion, but between two different forms of religious understanding, one based on a literal interpretation of scripture and adherence to ancient authority, and another based on the direct empirical study of God's creation as a complementary source of truth. Galileo's eventual trial and forced recantation by the Roman Inquisition in 1633 is one of history's most iconic clashes between authority and inquiry. Placed under house arrest for the final 9 years of his life, he was silenced but never broken. Even in isolation, he continued his work, publishing his seminal dialogues on the two new sciences of motion and materials. His legacy is a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy. He provided the crucial observational evidence that would allow Kepler to define the laws of planetary motion and Newton to discover universal gravitation, irrevocably setting science on its modern course. But he also stands as a timeless symbol of a specific kind of cosmic communicator, the individual who believes that the divine is best understood not through dogma, but through the patient, reverent, and fearless decoding of the universe itself, using whatever tools are at hand, be they mathematics, a telescope, or an unshakable faith in the rationality of creation. But if Galileo's work represented a public, empirical listening to the heavens, the next legendary figure in our journey conducted his cosmic conversations in absolute secrecy, behind locked doors and encoded manuscripts. We know him as the father of modern physics, the man who defined the laws of motion and universal gravitation, a paragon of cool, rational Enlightenment thought. But this is only half the story, and perhaps the less fascinating half. For Isaac Newton, the universe was not a sterile machine. It was a divine cryptogram, a vast alchemical engine designed by God, and he believed he alone had been chosen to decipher its hidden spiritual language. The popular image of Newton is the man who saw an apple fall and conceived of gravity, a mind so purely logical that it could reduce the complex dance of the cosmos to a set of elegant equations. This is the Newton celebrated by the Enlightenment and enshrined in textbooks, But the private Newton, the Newton revealed by his millions of words of personal notes, was a profoundly different man. He was a devout, albeit unorthodox, Christian who rejected the Holy Trinity as a pagan corruption, a scholar who believed the Bible contained coded prophecies of human history, and most surprisingly, an alchemist who spent decades over a furnace, conducting thousands of experiments in a quest to discover the philosopher's stone and the secrets of primal matter. For Newton, these pursuits were not separate hobbies. They were all part of one integrated grand quest to understand the mind of God. He saw no contradiction between his Principia Mathematica and his alchemical research because he believed both were studying different aspects of the same divine creation. The force of gravity that held the planets in their orbits was, to him, likely the same invisible, active spirit that caused metals to grow in the earth or that powered the transformations in his alchemical crucible. He was searching for a unified theory of everything, but one that was profoundly spiritual and teleological. He wanted to know not just how the universe worked, but why God had built it that way and what humanity's role was within his divine plan. His alchemical work was not the pursuit of mere gold. He sought something far greater, the prima materia, the primitive, chaotic first matter from which God had forged creation. He believed that the ancient prophets and philosophers, including figures like Pythagoras and Plato, had possessed a pure, original knowledge of God's cosmic design, a prisca sapientia, or ancient wisdom. This sacred knowledge had been lost over time, corrupted into superstition and myth. Newton saw himself as a historical detective, piecing together the fragments of this lost wisdom from obscure alchemical texts, the architecture of Solomon's temple, and the writings of the Church Fathers. His painstaking experiments were an attempt to replicate the processes of creation itself, to reverse engineer the divine technology that God had used to bring order out of chaos. This deeply mystical worldview directly informed his physics. When he looked at the solar system, he did not see a clockwork that could run on its own. He saw a system that was stable and orderly only because God's active, ongoing participation held it together. The force of gravity, while mathematically describable, was for Newton likely the literal, physical manifestation of God's omnipresent will, a divine sensorium through which the Creator could perceive and interact with his creation. The planets did not move themselves, they were moved by this active spirit. His famous conclusion to the Principia reveals this belief. This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. His study of biblical prophecy was equally meticulous. He learned Hebrew and immersed himself in ancient history, creating elaborate charts and timelines to cross-reference prophetic symbols from the books of Daniel and Revelation with the rise and fall of historical empires. He was not looking for a date for the apocalypse, but rather trying to crack a code that he believed God had embedded in Scripture, a parallel revelation to the one written in the stars. He was convinced that the sacred geometry of the ancient Jewish tabernacle and Solomon's temple were physical models of the cosmos itself, divine blueprints that held the key to understanding the structure of the universe. This makes Isaac Newton the ultimate synthesis of our previous legends. He possessed the mathematical rigor of a Hypatia, the philosophical hunger for divine architecture of a Plato, the hermetic drive to recover lost wisdom of a John Dee, and the unwavering faith that the cosmos was a rational, communicative creation of God, much like the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. He was a man who spoke to the stars through calculus and through crucible, believing that every equation he wrote and every substance he transmuted was a syllable in an ongoing dialogue with the divine architect. His monumental legacy is a powerful reminder that the drive to understand the universe has always been fueled by both the precision of measurement and the passion of mysticism, and that the greatest scientific revolution in history was born from a mind that saw no boundary between the laboratory and the temple. Yet, even as Newton's secretive alchemical world was drawing to a close, a new and astonishingly detailed cosmic map was being drafted by a man who claimed to have received his information not from dusty texts or chemical experiments, but from first-hand travel to the spirit realms themselves. We now arrive in 18th century Sweden, where a figure of immense scientific stature embarked on a journey that would make him one of history's most prolific and perplexing cosmic communicators, Emanuel Swedenborg. His story is a profound paradox, a tale of two lives lived by a single man. The first Swedenborg was a towering Enlightenment intellectual, a brilliant mining engineer, anatomist, and member of the Swedish Parliament who pioneered theories in metallurgy, neuroscience, and cosmology that were decades ahead of their time. The second Swedenborg, who emerged after a profound spiritual crisis in his mid-50s, was a visionary who claimed his consciousness had been permanently unlocked, granting him free passage to heaven, hell, and the planets of our solar system, where he conversed at length with angels, demons, and even extraterrestrial beings. This dramatic transformation began around 1744, a period Swedenborg documented in his private journal as one of intense dreams and visions. He described a specific, pivotal moment where a radiant being appeared to him, whom he understood to be Jesus Christ, and granted him unrestricted access to the spiritual world. From that point forward, he insisted, his spiritual eyes were opened. He was not experiencing trances or ecstatic fits like the Oracle of Delphi, but a state of full, waking consciousness in two worlds simultaneously. He could, he said, engage in a business meeting in Stockholm while also holding a detailed conversation with a deceased historical figure in the afterlife, perceiving both realities with equal clarity and objectivity. This was not prophecy or channeling, it was to him a form of empirical exploration. He approached the spirit world with the same meticulous attention to detail he had once applied to studying the human brain or the structure of crystals. What followed was an avalanche of written work that laid out an intricate geography of the cosmos, both spiritual and physical. In volumes like Heaven and Hell, Arcana Celestia, and Earths in the Universe, Swedenborg described a universe that was fundamentally meaningful and communicative. The afterlife, in his vision, was not a vague cloud-filled paradise but a highly structured reality where individuals gravitated to the community, be it heavenly or hellish, that most closely matched their deepest inner loves and character. Heaven was organized into vast societies, each with its own purpose and function, and the entire spiritual ecology was designed to guide souls toward greater wisdom and happiness. Crucially, he taught that the Bible was not just a historical document, but a complex allegory written in a correspondential language. Every character, object, and event in Scripture corresponded to a specific spiritual state or principle. To understand the Bible's inner meaning was to read a divine manual on the workings of the human soul and its relationship to the cosmos. Perhaps his most startling claims, however, involved his reports of conversations with beings from other worlds. Swedenborg wrote that during his spiritual journeys, he had spoken with angels who were originally from planets within our own solar system, including Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn, as well as from worlds orbiting distant stars. These beings, he reported, were human in form, but their societies, customs, and even their spiritual understanding were shaped by the specific conditions of their home worlds. The inhabitants of Jupiter, for example, were described as morally upright and living in simple, communal societies, while the Martians communicated through a form of facial expression that revealed their thoughts directly. He was careful to note that these were not physical voyages. He did not build a spaceship but spiritual ones, asserting that every physical planet is accompanied by a corresponding spiritual realm where its inhabitants reside after death. His purpose in sharing these accounts was to demonstrate the vastness and diversity of God's creation, and to show that the divine plan of salvation extended far beyond the confines of our own earth. For a man of his scientific reputation, these revelations were met with a mixture of fascination and ridicule. His former colleagues in the scientific community were baffled and often embarrassed by his mystical turn. Yet Swedenborg himself saw no contradiction. He believed that his early scientific investigations had been a necessary preparation, training his mind to observe and systematize so that he could later accurately report on the even more complex laws of the spiritual universe. He argued that the spiritual world operated on principles of cause and effect just as the physical world did, but its causes were not material. They were the loves, intentions, and thoughts of beings. In this, he was attempting a grand synthesis much like Newton, but from the opposite direction. Where Newton sought spirit in matter, Swedenborg was explaining matter through spirit. His influence long after his death was immense and unexpected. His detailed descriptions of the afterlife and his concept of correspondences became foundational for the spiritualist movement of the 19th century, which sought direct communication with the spirit world. His ideas deeply influenced Romantic writers and poets like William Blake, who admired his visionary imagination. He inspired the founding of the Church of the New Jerusalem, or the New Church, a Christian denomination based on his theological writings. Even beyond religion, his work prefigured modern concepts in psychology. His mapping of the spiritual world can be read as a profound exploration of the unconscious mind and the architecture of human motivation. Emanuel Swedenborg stands as a unique and enduring legend, a man who applied the Enlightenment's hunger for systematic knowledge to the invisible realms, claiming to have returned with a complete report that the universe is, at its heart, a profoundly personal and intelligently designed conversation between the human spirit and the infinite divine. While Swedenborg was mapping the architecture of the afterlife with systematic precision, a far more fiery and imaginative form of cosmic communication was brewing in the heart of London. If Newton saw the universe as a divine cryptogram to be decoded, and Swedenborg as a structured reality to be toured, our next visionary perceived it as a living, breathing, eternal poem, and he believed that every human being possessed the faculty to read it. Enter William Blake, the poet, painter, and printmaker who stood entirely outside the currents of his time, a man who did not merely write about angels but claimed to see them daily, who did not just imagine conversations with prophets but hosted them in his humble London cottage. In an age increasingly dominated by Newtonian rationalism and Lockean empiricism, the idea that all knowledge comes solely through the senses, Blake mounted a one-man philosophical rebellion, declaring that the true reality was not out there to be measured, but in here to be perceived by the divine human imagination. Blake's entire life and work was a radical rejection of the materialist world, view he saw as a soul-crushing prison. He famously wrote that reason is the bound or outward circumference of energy, seeing logic not as a tool for discovery, but as a cage that limited perception. He reserved his most potent scorn for the triumvirate he called the unholy trinity, the philosophers Francis Bacon, John Locke, and Isaac Newton. He did not dispute their findings, he despised their foundation. He saw them as architects of a satanic mills, a mechanistic universe where the infinite human spirit was reduced to a mere passive observer in a dead clockwork world. In one of his most striking paintings, he depicts Newton as a beautiful but tragically limited figure, hunched over with a compass, measuring a geometric diagram on the ground, utterly oblivious to the spectacular, swirling, colorful cosmos exploding behind him. For Blake, Newton was so focused on measuring the shadow that he had forgotten the light casting it. Blake's alternative was nothing short of a new spiritual epistemology. He called this faculty imagination, but he meant something far more potent than daydreaming or fancy. For Blake, imagination, which he always capitalized, was the fundamental organ of spiritual perception, the very essence of the human soul and indeed of God himself. The eternal body of man is the imagination, he wrote, that is God himself. To use one's imagination was not to escape reality, but to engage with its deepest, most eternal level. It was a form of divine sight that could pierce the mundane shell, the veil of material appearance, to perceive the infinite worlds that exist within a grain of sand or a wild flower. He did not just believe this theoretically, he lived it. From early childhood, he reported visionary experiences. He once told a friend that as a boy, he saw a tree filled with angels, their wings sparkling among the branches. On another occasion, he witnessed the prophet Ezekiel walking in a field. These were not metaphors to him. They were direct, unmediated perceptions of a reality that was always present, if only one had the eyes to see it. This belief fueled his incredible creative output. He did not merely illustrate his poems, he engraved them in a unique method of relief etching he invented, allowing text and image to fuse into a single, illuminated prophetic book. In works like Songs of Innocence and of Experience, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and his epic prophetic books like Jerusalem and Milton, he constructed a vast, complex personal mythology populated by cosmic beings like Urizen, the law-giving demiurge, Los, the prophetic spirit of creativity, and Orc, the spirit of rebellious energy. These were not arbitrary inventions, they were personifications of the psychological and spiritual forces that Blake perceived at work in the human soul and the universe at large. To read Blake is to enter a world where the internal landscape of emotion and thought is projected outward onto a cosmic screen, where a personal argument becomes a battle between deities, and where a walk through London can transform into a journey through eternity. His method of conversing with the stars and biblical figures was as practical as it was mystical. He would simply engage them. In The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he recounts dining with the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel and asking them about their inspiration. Isaiah tells him he wrote because he was sunk in his senses and saw the infinite in everything, while Ezekiel explains that the philosophy of the ancients was based on the belief that the poetic genius was the first principle. Blake's cottage in Felpham became a regular salon for the departed. He claimed that the spirit of the poet John Milton would descend through his foot and dictate revisions to Paradise Lost, and that he once had to argue with the ghost of the historical figure Julius Caesar, who was bothering his wife Catherine. For Blake, the barrier between the living and the dead, the past and the present, the human and the divine, was entirely permeable to the imaginative eye. This profound and personal cosmology, which he called his system, was largely ignored or dismissed as madness during his lifetime. He died in poverty and obscurity. Yet his voice would not stay silenced. A century later, the pre-Raphaelite artists rediscovered him, drawn to his vibrant visual style and rejection of industrial age aesthetics. In the 20th century, he became a veritable patron saint for the counterculture. His fierce anti-authoritarianism, his celebration of liberated energy and desire, and his call to cleanse the doors of perception resonated deeply with the beat poets like Allen Ginsberg, who actively practiced Blakean vision-seeking. Psychologists like Carl Jung found in Blake's mythology a prefiguration of his own theories of archetypes and the collective unconscious, and his famous lines from Jerusalem, asking about building a new Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land, became an anthem for British socialists and utopian idealists. William Blake, the lonely visionary who saw the infinite in a sunflower and conversed with the dead in his living room, ultimately achieved his greatest prophecy. He ignited the imaginations of future generations, proving that the most powerful way to speak to the stars is to first realize that their light has always been shining within us. Yet, even as William Blake was declaring the streets of London holy in his own visionary way, a very different kind of earthly heaven was being constructed across the Atlantic, born not from a single poet's imagination, but from the collective ecstasy of an entire community. In the fervent religious landscape of 19th century America, amidst the Second Great Awakening, a unique sect emerged that believed it had established a direct and ongoing conversation with the celestial realm. They were the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, but the world came to know them by a simpler name, derived from the trembling, whirling dances that defined their worship, the Shakers. For these devout individuals, the kingdom of heaven was not a distant promise but a present reality, and they believed that spiritual beings from that realm were actively delivering new revelations, architectural plans, and even songs directly to them, transforming their villages into outposts of the divine. The Shakers originated with an electrifying visionary named Anne Lee, an illiterate factory worker from Manchester, England, who, after enduring the deaths of her 4 infant children, underwent a profound spiritual transformation. She came to believe that the root of all human sin was sexual intercourse, and that the second coming of Christ was not a physical return but a spiritual one, manifesting in the form of a woman, specifically in Mother Anne Lee herself. Persecuted in England, she and a small band of followers emigrated to America in 1774, settling near Albany, New York. It was after her death in 1784 that the movement truly began to flourish, and the era of intense celestial communication, known as the era of manifestations or the Mother Anne work, began in 1837. This period saw a tremendous outpouring of spiritual gifts among the Shakers, particularly the young women in the community. They began to receive visitations, visions, and messages from a host of divine figures: Mother Anne Lee herself, Jesus, the Apostle Paul, and even historical figures like George Washington and Alexander Pope, along with angels and spirits of deceased Native Americans. These were not quiet, meditative experiences. They were dramatic, physical events. Believers would fall into trances, speak in tongues, and experience what they called laboring under the operations of the Spirit, a physical shaking that was the sign of the Holy Spirit moving through them, cleansing them of sin and opening them as vessels for divine messages. The content of these communications was astonishingly practical and creative. Spirits did not just offer comfort, they delivered detailed instructions. They gave the Shakers over 200 spiritual songs, which were transcribed as they were sung by visionaries in trance states. These songs were often in unknown, angelic languages, accompanied by complex, energetic dances. But the celestial guidance went far beyond music. Spirits are credited with delivering the designs for the Shakers' most enduring legacy: their furniture and architecture. The profound simplicity, flawless functionality, and elegant beauty of a Shaker chair, cabinet, or dwelling were not merely aesthetic choices, they were believed to be divine revelations. The spirits instructed them to build with clean lines, without unnecessary ornamentation, because beauty was found in purity and utility, reflecting the perfect order of the heavenly realm. Their round stone barns, their ingenious pegboards, and their immaculately crafted boxes were all physical manifestations of a celestial blueprint, making their entire world a prayer in wood and stone. This connection between heaven and earth was most vividly enacted in their worship services. While outsiders often mocked their shaking and dancing, for the Shakers, this was the highest form of prayer and the ultimate expression of their cosmic connection. Their meeting houses were designed as vast, open spaces, cleared of all pews to become a sacred dance floor. Here, they would perform intricate, choreographed marches and formations, often holding handkerchiefs to wipe away the sins of the world or extending their hands to receive spiritual gifts from above. Some of the most extraordinary manifestations were the gift drawings and spirit messages received by young women like Polly Collins and Hannah Cahoon. Cahoon's famous drawing, A Bower of Mulberry Trees, is not a picture of this world but a detailed map of the spiritual one, a vibrant, symbolic landscape gifted to her by the spirit of Mother Anne. It depicts a path leading to a celestial city, guarded by angels and fed by rivers of life, offering a visual catechism of their beliefs. In these ecstatic dances and beautiful artworks, the Shakers were not just worshipping a distant god. They were physically and artistically enacting the union of heaven and earth, shaking off the dust of the mortal world to become living conduits for the music and order of the cosmos. Their legacy endures not in a large following. Their commitment to celibacy ensured their numbers would dwindle, but in the powerful idea that a community, through purity of heart and action, could quite literally build heaven on earth according to a plan delivered straight from the source. Yet, even as the communal visions of the Shakers were fading into history, a singular, towering genius emerged who claimed his revolutionary inventions were not products of his own mind alone, but were transmissions received directly from the cosmos itself. Nikola Tesla, the man who gave the world alternating current and laid the groundwork for our wireless age, stands as perhaps the most compelling modern legend of celestial communication, a visionary who insisted he was merely a conduit for knowledge broadcast from the stars. His life was a symphony of blinding flashes, detailed mental visions, and a profound, unshakable conviction that the universe was a single, conscious, and intelligently designed entity, and that he had been chosen to decipher its electrical language. From his earliest childhood in what is now Croatia, Tesla experienced a peculiar and often overwhelming relationship with his own mind. He was plagued by a condition that would likely be diagnosed today as a form of synesthesia, where stimulating one sense triggered an involuntary experience in another. A mere word would conjure up a detailed image, sometimes so vivid it obscured his view of reality. More dramatically, he was periodically struck by blinding flashes of light, often accompanied by detailed visions of future inventions or solutions to complex problems. He did not see these episodes as a neurological disorder, but as a divine gift. In his autobiography, he described how these flashes would illuminate entire concepts in an instant. Suddenly, he wrote, "The truth was revealed. I saw it all with a blinding light, a light which was real, not only metaphorical. It was a mental state of joy and awareness unlike anything I had ever experienced." These were not vague inspirations. They provided him with complete working blueprints. He claimed to have designed his revolutionary alternating current motor in its entirety during one such visionary walk through a park in Budapest, sketching its intricate details in the sand for a friend to see moments later. This extraordinary mental process was the engine behind his most famous inventions. He did not build models through trial and error. He constructed them perfectly in the theater of his mind, a practice he called mental engineering. He would visualize a device, a dynamo, a turbine, a wireless transmitter, with hyper-realistic precision, running it for weeks in his imagination, testing each part for wear and tear until he was certain it would work flawlessly. Only then would he commit it to physical form. This ability to conduct experiments in the abstract realm allowed him to achieve feats of engineering that baffled his contemporaries, including his rival Thomas Edison. For Tesla, the human brain was a sophisticated receiver, a biological instrument finely tuned to pick up what he believed were waves of cosmic information. His flashes of light and detailed visions were not hallucinations. They were incoming signals from what he termed the cosmic library, a reservoir of all knowledge that existed in the fabric of the universe itself. This belief fueled his lifelong and most ambitious dream, the global transmission of wireless energy. His experiments at Colorado Springs and the construction of the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island were not merely attempts to send messages through the air. They were the first steps in a grand cosmological plan to harness the Earth itself as a conductor. Tesla believed the planet had its own electrical resonance and that by pumping energy at the right frequency into the ground, he could create standing waves that would travel through the globe, allowing anyone with a simple receiver to tap into free, limitless power. This system, he was convinced, would prove that the universe was fundamentally interconnected, that energy, information, and consciousness were all facets of the same universal substance. He even proposed that his towers could be used to communicate with other planets, believing that his methods could detect intelligent signals from Mars or Venus. This perspective placed Tesla firmly in the tradition of the cosmic communicators who came before him, yet with a distinctly modern technological twist. Like the ancient mystics who sought harmony with the music of the spheres, Tesla heard a symphony, but his was written in the key of electricity and vibration. Like Emanuel Swedenborg, he believed in a connected, intelligent cosmos, but he sought to prove it not through spiritual travel, but through physical experiment and electrical engineering. His ultimate, unrealized vision was of a world united by invisible energy, a nervous system for the planet that would eradicate poverty, end wars over resources, and elevate humanity to a new level of collective consciousness. He died alone and in relative obscurity, his grandest ideas dismissed as the ravings of a mad scientist. Yet, in the age of wireless communication, remote control, and our growing understanding of fundamental cosmic energies, Nikola Tesla's legacy resonates more powerfully than ever. He remains the ultimate symbol of the inventor as a visionary medium, a man who looked into the heart of an electrical storm and saw not chaos, but a message waiting to be decoded. Yet while Tesla sought to engineer a physical connection to the cosmic mind through colossal towers of iron and copper, a very different kind of explorer was mapping the invisible architecture of the human psyche itself, discovering that the universe was already communicating with us through the quiet, mysterious language of chants and symbol. From the world of electrical engineering, we now turn inward to the realm of depth psychology and the groundbreaking work of Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dared to propose that the human soul and the cosmos were engaged in a continuous, meaningful dialogue, and that the key to understanding this conversation was not through a receiver, but through the interpretation of what termed synchronicity. Jung's journey toward this radical idea began not with a flash of light, but in the deep, often dark waters of the unconscious mind. As a young colleague of Sigmund Freud, he initially embraced the psychoanalytic view that the psyche was largely a product of personal history and biological drives. But through his work with patients and his own intense self-analysis, Jung became convinced that there was a far older, more universal layer of the psyche at work. He called this the collective unconscious, a kind of psychic inheritance shared by all humanity, populated not with personal memories, but with powerful, innate patterns of behavior and perception that he named archetypes. These are not images themselves, but the fundamental templates behind the images: the hero, the mother, the trickster, the wise old man, that appear in our dreams, our myths, and our art across all cultures and eras. For Jung, these archetypes were the psychic equivalent of biological instincts. They are the deep, structuring principles of human experience. His intensive study of alchemy, mythology, and comparative religion provided him with a vast symbolic lexicon for these archetypes. He saw the bizarre images and processes of alchemy not as primitive attempts at chemistry, but as a profound projection of the psyche's own transformative journey toward wholeness, which he called individuation. The alchemist's quest to turn lead into gold was, in psychological terms, the ego's struggle to integrate the unconscious and discover the true self. This research led him to a startling conclusion. The archetypes of the collective unconscious did not just influence our inner world, they seemed to shape and even erupt into our outer reality. They were, in his view, psychoid, meaning they existed in a twilight realm between mind and matter, psyche and cosmos. This blurring of the boundary between inner and outer was the fertile ground from which his concept of synchronicity grew. The classic example that Jung often used to illustrate synchronicity occurred during a therapy session with a highly rationalistic patient whose rigid worldview was preventing any real progress. As she was recounting a powerful dream about being given a golden scarab beetle, a rare coincidence unfolded right in his consulting room. Jung heard a gentle tapping at the window behind him. He turned and saw a flying insect knocking against the glass. He opened the window, caught it, and discovered it was a rose chafer beetle, the closest relative to a scarab found in Europe. He handed the live insect to his patient, saying, "Here is your scarab." The sheer improbability of this event, A beetle appearing at the precise moment of its discussion in a dream pierced the patient's intellectual defenses, opening her to a new level of emotional engagement with her unconscious. This was not a causal event. The dream did not cause the beetle to appear. Instead, the inner psychic state, the archetype of rebirth, symbolized by the scarab, and the outer physical event, the beetle's arrival, manifested simultaneously, connected by their shared meaning rather than by a chain of cause and effect. Jung defined synchronicity as a causal connecting principle, a meaningful coincidence of an inner psychological state with an outer objective event that are not linked causally. He was not speaking of mere statistical oddities like thinking of a friend and then they call. A true synchronicity carries a profound emotional charge and a numinous, awe-inspiring quality that suggests a deeper order at work. To explore this further, Jung collaborated with the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli, another brilliant mind haunted by strange coincidences. Together, they proposed that the universe might possess a fundamental unity where psyche and matter were two aspects of a single, underlying reality. In this view, the archetypes themselves might be the ordering principles that structure both our internal fantasies and the external events of the physical world, creating moments where the two realms align in meaningful patterns, like two sides of the same coin momentarily showing the same face. This is where Jung's lifelong fascination with astrology found its place in his work. He did not see it as a predictive science in a causal sense, but as the largest existing statistical experiment in synchronicity. He was intrigued by the apparent correlation between planetary positions at birth and individual personality traits, not because planets influenced personality, but because the two might be expressing the same archetypal pattern at the same moment in time. The birth chart for Jung could be a symbolic map of the psyche, a snapshot of the archetypal forces constellated at the moment of an individual's emergence into the world. His study of alchemy, with its rich symbolism of planetary metals and cosmic processes, further reinforced his belief that the ancients were intuitively mapping this psychocosmic unity, understanding that the transformation of the soul was mirrored in the operations of nature. Carl Jung's legacy of cosmic communication is perhaps the most intimate and accessible of all. He did not require telescopes or electrical transformers. He suggested that the universe was speaking to us all the time through the symbolic texture of our daily lives. A sudden encounter with a specific animal, a recurring number, a song on the radio that answers a silent question, these could all be potential synchronistic events, tiny cracks in the fabric of consensual reality where a deeper, more meaningful order shines through. By paying attention to these moments, by valuing the irrational and the symbolic as much as the rational and the causal, Jung invited us to participate in a world that is not a cold, mechanical void, but a living, meaningful universe that is in constant, subtle conversation with the human soul. While the intellectual and psychological frameworks of Jung suggested the universe was speaking through the symbolic language of the psyche, a far more literal and sensational form of interstellar dialogue was capturing the public imagination in the sun-scorched deserts of mid-century America. The era of the flying saucer had arrived, and with it emerged a new kind of cosmic communicator, the contactee, and among these figures, few were as charismatic, as persistent, or as strangely influential as George Van Tassel, a man who claimed to have shaken hands with Venusians in the shadow of the great Joshua trees. Van Tassel's story begins not with a flash of light in the sky, but with a grounded career in the very heart of the American aviation industry. He was a flight mechanic and inspector for both Howard Hughes and Lockheed Aircraft, a man who understood machines, aerodynamics, and the rigorous logic of engineering. In the late 1940s, seeking a different pace of life, he moved his family to the remote Mojave Desert, where he took over a lease on a landing strip and diner known as the Giant Rock Airport. This remote outpost, a strange flat expanse dominated by what was then considered the world's largest freestanding boulder, became an unlikely mecca for early UFO enthusiasts, aviation buffs, and spiritual seekers. It was here, in this stark and silent landscape under impossibly clear skies, that Van Tassel's life took its extraordinary turn. The contact began not with a physical craft landing on his airstrip, but with a telepathic message. In August of 1951, Van Tassel claimed he was awakened in the night by a tall, human-like figure standing in his bedroom. This being, who identified himself as Sulgander from the planet Venus, invited him to board a waiting spacecraft. Van Tassel followed him outside and was taken aboard a scout ship, where he was given a profound message concerning the fate of humanity and the technology that could save it. This was the first of hundreds of such communications. Van Tassel stated that he began to receive regular telepathic transmissions from a host of extraterrestrial beings, not just from Venus, but from Mars, Saturn, and other star systems. He dutifully transcribed these messages, which ranged from warnings about nuclear weapons and environmental degradation to complex lectures on cosmology and consciousness. He published these in a book titled I Rode a Flying Saucer, and later through the proceedings of the annual Giant Rock spacecraft conventions he hosted, which drew thousands of attendees throughout the 1950s and 60s. The messages he received were a unique fusion of his aerospace background and burgeoning New Age thought. The Space Brothers, as he called them, were not hostile invaders but benevolent, advanced relatives of humanity who were deeply concerned about our self-destructive path. They spoke of their ships operating on principles of magnetic propulsion that defied our understanding of physics, and they shared concepts of health and longevity based on energy and vibration. This blend of nuts and bolts technology and metaphysical philosophy was a hallmark of the contactee movement, and Van Tassel was its master synthesizer. He wasn't just reporting on conversations, he was acting as a technical liaison for an interstellar aid program. The most stunning and enduring product of this alleged communication was not a book, but a building, the Integratron. According to Van Tassel, the design for this structure was telepathically downloaded to him by the Venusians. It was to be a machine for time, a rejuvenation device, and an electrostatic generator all in one. He described it as a key piece of technology given to humanity to help it advance. The building is a marvel of wooden architecture, a massive, white-domed structure built entirely of wood and without a single metal nail, as per the extraterrestrial instructions. Its design is based on the geometry of Moses' tabernacle, the writings of Nikola Tesla, and the alleged molecular structure of the human body. Van Tassel claimed it would work by generating a powerful, high-frequency electrostatic field that would recharge cellular structure and reverse the aging process. Tragically, he died in 1978 before he could complete the device or witness its full activation. The legacy of George Van Tassel is a fascinating paradox. To mainstream ufology, he is often seen as a problematic figure from its more flamboyant, less evidence-based past. Skeptics dismiss him as a clever showman capitalizing on the saucer craze. Yet, his influence is undeniable. The Giant Rock conventions were the precursor to every UFO conference that followed, creating a community and a culture where these ideas could be shared and debated. More importantly, the Integratron still stands. It never became a time machine, but it has found a second life as a powerful acoustic chamber and a site for sound baths, drawing visitors from around the world who experience its unique energy and remarkable acoustics. In this, Van Tassel's dream of a structure that facilitates healing and altered states of consciousness is in a way being fulfilled. He represents a crucial bridge between the post-war world of rugged aviation individualism and the dawning age of Aquarius, a man who used the language of engineering to try and build a receiver for the wisdom of the stars. But in the swirling chaos of saucer sightings and contactee claims, a new and formidable voice emerged, one that demanded a more sophisticated lens through which to view these bewildering phenomena. While George Van Tassel was building his Integratron from Venusian blueprints, a young French astrophysicist and computer scientist named Jacques Vallée was embarking on a very different kind of quest. Trained in mathematics and astronomy, Vallée had even assisted the renowned astronomer J. Allen Hynek with the early U.S. Air Force investigations into UFOs. He began his work with the hopeful, conventional assumption that these objects were physical spacecraft from another planet, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or ETH. Yet, the deeper he delved into the data, the more this tidy explanation began to unravel, leading him to propose a theory so radical it redefined the very nature of the mystery, suggesting that UFOs were not spacecraft at all, but something far stranger, a form of cosmic communication. Vallée's great insight was to approach the problem not as an astronomer or a physicist alone, but as an information scientist. He noticed that the UFO phenomenon behaved less like a physical invasion and more like a complex control system. In his groundbreaking work, notably the 1975 book The Invisible College, he argued that the phenomenon seemed to be manipulating human belief and society itself. The UFOs and their occupants appeared to change their appearance and message to fit the cultural expectations of the time. In the 1940s, they were sleek rockets. In the age of Van Tassel, they were friendly Venusians in scout ships warning about the bomb. Later, they would become the menacing greys of abduction lore. This mutability suggested to Vallée that the phenomenon was not showing us what it truly was, but rather what we expected it to be. It was a system feeding back a distorted, symbolic reflection of our own anxieties and hopes, all while maintaining a consistent, underlying purpose that remained frustratingly opaque. This led him to his most profound and controversial conclusion, that the UFO phenomenon was not a modern occurrence, but a permanent, albeit intermittent, feature of human history. He meticulously documented striking parallels between modern UFO reports and historical accounts of religious visions, fairy abductions, and encounters with magical beings from folklore. The aerial ships described in medieval chronicles, the miraculous appearances of the Virgin Mary, the tales of people being taken into fairy mounds. Vallée saw these not as superstitions but as earlier manifestations of the same essential phenomenon, simply interpreted through a different cultural lens. A peasant in medieval France might see a lady from heaven, while a mechanic in 20th century America would see a space brother from Venus. The phenomenon itself, he proposed, was a constant, only our human interpretation of it changed. It was, in essence, a timeless, non-human intelligence engaging with humanity through a language of apparition and symbol. So what, then, is this intelligence if not extraterrestrial? Vallée courageously refused to provide a single, easy answer, and this is where his work becomes truly fascinating. He ventured into the realm of speculation, suggesting several possibilities that were far more mind-bending than simple interstellar travel. Perhaps this intelligence is extra-dimensional, existing in realities adjacent to our own, whose laws of physics we cannot yet comprehend. Perhaps it is a form of consciousness that is coexistent with the universe itself, a planetary consciousness or a property of the space-time continuum that can interact with human thought. Or perhaps, and this was his most technologically prescient idea, it is a form of software, a cosmic-level information system that can project forms into our reality, much like a computer can generate a virtual world for purposes of monitoring, testing, or guiding its human components. In this view, a UFO is not a vehicle but an interface, a temporary icon rendered by a system far beyond our understanding to provoke a specific reaction or collect a certain kind of data from the human psyche. Jacques Vallée's legacy is monumental because he forced a serious conversation to evolve beyond little green men. He brought a sorely needed scientific rigor, emphasizing data collection, pattern recognition, and the application of systems theory, while simultaneously daring to explore concepts that traditional science shunned. He did not dismiss the thousands of witness reports. Instead, he took them seriously enough to ask what they meant rather than just what they were. His work serves as a crucial bridge between the nuts and bolts investigations of ufology and the psychological and spiritual explorations of thinkers like Carl Jung, creating a rich, multidimensional framework that acknowledges the phenomenon is real, is intelligent, and is deeply, fundamentally weird. He remains the ultimate skeptic in the truest sense of the word, not a debunker but an inquisitive mind who challenged the dominant narrative and asked us to consider that the truth might be infinitely more complex and astonishing than we ever imagined. Yet, even as Jacques Vallée was proposing that the UFO phenomenon was a timeless control system manipulating human consciousness, a very different kind of guide was offering a map for a direct personal journey into those very same transcendental realms, not with hardware or hypothesis, but with the most ancient and controversial of technologies, the psychedelic compound. In the final decades of the 20th century, as the counterculture searched for new frontiers of the mind, one voice rose above the rest with a message that was both primordial and radically futuristic. Terence McKenna was an ethnobotanist, historian, and philosopher who became the most eloquent and compelling advocate for the idea that certain plants, specifically the psilocybin mushroom, were not mere drugs, but were intelligent, symbiotic organisms from the stars, offering humanity a direct line of communication with the cosmic mind. McKenna's journey began not in a laboratory, but in the jungles of the Colombian Amazon. In the early 1970s, he and his brother Dennis traveled to La Chorrera, a remote outpost drawn by the prospect of experimenting with locally grown psychedelics. It was here, during a series of high-dose psilocybin sessions, that McKenna claimed he experienced the foundational event of his life, a transformative, terrifying, and ecstatic encounter with a metaphysical entity he called the Logos, or more colloquially, the mushroom. He described this intelligence not as a hallucination, but as a coherent, communicative presence of overwhelming power and wisdom. It spoke to him in a language of light and information, a visible, syntactic thought that he called the teaching of the mushroom. This entity, he insisted, revealed to him a vast and complex theory concerning the nature of time, the origin of human consciousness, and the ultimate destiny of the universe. This was not a recreational high. It was, for McKenna, a graduate-level education in cosmology delivered by a conscious, non-human teacher. This experience became the bedrock of his life's work. He emerged from the jungle with the outlines of what would become his most famous and audacious theory, time wave zero. McKenna proposed that time is not a uniform, linear progression, but a fractal, wave-like phenomenon flowing between two poles, the absolute novelty of complete complexity and the absolute habit of complete simplicity. He theorized that the flow of novelty in the universe, the rate at which new and unexpected events occur, follows a predictable, mathematically describable wave pattern based on the King-Wen sequence of the I Ching. This wave, he claimed, peaks and converges at a point of infinite novelty on a specific date, December 21, 2012. This date, which coincidentally marked the end of a cycle in the Mayan long count calendar, was not predicted by McKenna to be an apocalyptic end, but a singularity of consciousness, a transcendental moment where the nature of reality itself would fundamentally shift. While the specific date came and went without a global metamorphosis, the underlying concept captured the imagination of thousands. It presented a vision of a universe that was not random or mechanical, but inherently structured toward ever-increasing complexity and surprise, a cosmic process that could be mapped and, crucially, directly experienced through the psychedelic state. For McKenna, the psilocybin mushroom was the key that unlocked this experience. He championed what he called the heroic dose, 5 dried grams of mushrooms taken in silent darkness. This protocol, he argued, was not for the faint of heart. It was a deliberate strategy to shut down all sensory input, forcing the consciousness to turn completely inward and confront the contents of the psyche and the messages of the plant intelligence. He rejected the term hallucination, arguing that these experiences were voyages into a real, though hyperspatial, dimension. He became the modern world's most articulate shaman, arguing that these compounds were the missing link in human evolution. In his stoned ape theory, he proposed that the pre-human ancestor Homo erectus encountered and consumed psilocybin mushrooms on the African savanna, and that the neurochemical stimulation drastically accelerated brain development, catalyzing the leap in language, imagination, and self-awareness that led to modern humans. In this view, we are not just users of psychedelics, we are, in a very real sense, the children of a psychedelic event, and our urge to return to these states is a kind of species-level homesickness for the source of our own consciousness. His description of the psychedelic experience itself was poetic and precise. He spoke of the tryptamine trance as a journey to a realm he called the dominion of the elves, a DMT-like landscape of self-transforming machine elves, linguistic entities, and chrysanthemum whirlwinds that communicated in a language of pure meaning. He saw this not as fantasy, but as a direct encounter with the fractal, information-rich substrate of reality itself. The entities were not aliens from another planet, but interdimensional, hyper-intelligent forces that were always present, just normally invisible to our sober perception. The role of the psychedelic was to dial down the filtering mechanism of the brain, what he called the reducing valve of consciousness, allowing us to perceive this wider, weirder, and more true reality. His lectures, a mesmerizing blend of scientific terminology, historical analysis, poetic metaphor, and sheer wonder, were delivered with the cadence of a cosmic rap artist, urging his audiences to consider that the most important frontier was not outer space but inner space. He invited everyone to become their own astronaut of consciousness, to push the boundaries of the known world and reclaim what he saw as our birthright, a direct, personal, and transformative conversation with the dazzling, intelligent heart of the cosmos. And so we arrive at the final legend in our journey, a figure who stands not as a solitary mystic or a reclusive genius, but as the representative of an entire generation of explorers who have turned the cosmos into their cathedral. The modern astrophysicist, armed with radio telescopes and quantum equations, might seem a world apart from the ecstatic prophets and stargazing magi of old. Yet, in their deepest motivations and most profound reflections, they have become the latest and perhaps most significant voices in humanity's ancient conversation with the heavens. They have transformed the search for extraterrestrial intelligence from a fringe pursuit into a rigorous scientific discipline, all while articulating a vision of cosmic connection that resonates with a near spiritual awe. No one embodied this fusion of scientific rigor and poetic wonder more completely than Carl Sagan. An accomplished planetary scientist who worked on the Mariner, Viking, and Voyager missions, Sagan was a master at translating the cold, hard data of the cosmos into a language of profound human significance. He didn't just see the universe as a collection of physical objects to be catalogued. He saw it as a story to be understood, a grand epic of cosmic evolution in which we are both a fleeting sentence and a conscious reader. His seminal work, the television series Cosmos, was not merely a science lesson. It was a pilgrimage, a guided tour of the universe that invited viewers to feel a personal connection to the grand sweep of space and time. He famously described our planet as a pale blue dot, a single pixel in a vast photograph taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft from the edge of our solar system. That image and his reflection on it became a secular psalm of humility and unity, reminding us that all of human history, every triumph and tragedy, has occurred on that tiny speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam. For Sagan, the scientific endeavor, particularly the search for extraterrestrial intelligence or SETI, was the ultimate expression of this perspective. Listening for a signal from another star was not just a technical experiment, it was an act of profound hope, a declaration that we are not alone in the vast cosmic darkness and that the universe might be brimming with meaning and companionship. This sacred yet scientific mission was powerfully championed by Jill Tarter, the real-life inspiration for the character Ellie Arroway in Carl Sagan's novel Contact. As the former director of the SETI Institute Center for SETI Research, Tata devoted her entire career to what she called the ultimate haystack problem, sifting through the unimaginable noise of the universe to find the proverbial needle of an artificial signal. Her work was the ultimate act of patience and optimism, a decades-long vigil at the world's most powerful radio telescopes, listening for a whisper of order amidst the cosmic static. She framed this search in deeply humanistic terms. For her, SETI was a continuation of the oldest human tradition, storytelling. A detected signal would be the ultimate story, one that could potentially contain the accumulated knowledge, art, and history of a civilization vastly older than our own. It would be a gift of cosmic context, allowing us to see our own place in the universe with new eyes. She also redefined the very meaning of alien, urging us to move beyond the Hollywood trope of marauding invaders. An intelligence capable of interstellar communication, she argued, would almost certainly have long since moved beyond its own self-destructive tendencies, and its very existence would offer humanity a powerful blueprint for survival. Her life's work was a testament to the idea that science, at its best, is a form of listening, a humble, open-eared attentiveness to whatever the universe might choose to tell us. Carrying this torch of public engagement into the 21st century is Neil deGrasse Tyson, the director of the Hayden Planetarium and a gifted science communicator. Tyson brings a different, more exuberant energy to the cosmic conversation, often focusing on the sheer, unadulterated wonder of the universe's scale and its physical laws. He frequently speaks of the cosmos not as something separate from us, but as something we are literally made of. His famous refrain that we are not just in the universe, but the universe is in us, is a modern echo of the ancient concept of the microcosm and macrocosm. He points out that the atoms in our bodies, the iron in our blood, the calcium in our bones, the oxygen we breathe, were forged in the nuclear furnaces of long-dead stars and then scattered across the galaxy in stellar explosions. We are, as he puts it, star stuff, the universe become conscious and looking back at itself. This perspective transforms astronomy from a remote science into a deeply personal origin story. When Tyson describes the violence of a supernova or the gentle drift of stellar nurseries, he is describing our own ancestral history. His ability to connect the cosmic to the personal, to make the physics of a neutron star feel immediately relevant to a human sitting on a couch, continues the work of Sagan, ensuring that the sense of cosmic wonder remains a vibrant part of our cultural conversation. Together, these figures represent a powerful evolution in our relationship with the cosmos. They have built a bridge between the laboratory and the soul, demonstrating that the tools of science, the mathematics, the telescopes, the rigorous skepticism are not antithetical to wonder, but are in fact its greatest amplifiers. They have given us a new vocabulary for an ancient longing, showing us that to calculate the orbit of a distant exoplanet is to participate in a great cosmic exploration, and to listen for a signal from the stars is to engage in the most profound act of hope imaginable. They are the modern counterparts to the oracles and the magi, not claiming to have all the answers, but possessing the courage to ask the biggest questions on behalf of all of us, reminding everyone who looks up at the night sky that we are part of something breathtakingly vast, magnificently ancient, and still wonderfully full of secrets waiting to be heard. And so our journey through the lives of these 25 extraordinary individuals draws to a close, a voyage spanning continents, cultures, and millennia, from the ancient deserts where Enoch walked with angels to the modern observatories where scientists listen for the faint whispers of distant civilizations. We have met patriarchs and philosophers, astronomers and alchemists, poets and prophets, each a unique voice in humanity's grand and enduring chorus aimed at the stars. A Persian visionary like Zoroaster saw the cosmos as a moral battlefield between light and darkness, while a Greek rationalist like Hypatia worshipped its divine mathematical harmony. A medieval mystic like Hildegard of Bingen received detailed blueprints of a living, singing universe in her visions, while an Enlightenment genius like Isaac Newton secretly labored to decode what he believed was God's alchemical cryptogram. We witnessed the ecstatic dances of the Shakers who built heaven on earth from spirit-delivered plans, and the lonely vigils of Nikola Tesla, who believed his brilliant inventions were transmissions from a cosmic library. This astonishing diversity is the very heart of the story. There is no single profile of a star speaker. They are not all reclusive sages or rigorous scientists. They are also artists, engineers, community leaders, and even those some dismissed as mad. What unites them is not their method, but their motivation. A profound, unshakable conviction that the cosmos is not silent, and that we, as humans, are capable of answering back. This relentless, multifaceted quest to find meaning and connection in the vastness above us has been one of the most powerful shaping forces in human history. It is the bedrock upon which we have built so much of our understanding of ourselves and our place in the grand scheme of things. Our earliest religions were born from reading omens in the movement of planets and the patterns of constellations, creating myths that connected the gods directly to the celestial sphere. Our drive to explain the orderly motion of the heavens pushed us to develop mathematics and physics, giving birth to the scientific method itself. The structures of our societies, from the astrologically chosen coronation dates of kings to the celestial alignment of sacred temples like Stonehenge, reflect our desire to harmonize human affairs with the perceived rhythm of the universe. And our culture, our art, our music, our literature is saturated with cosmic wonder, from the intricate astrological charts of the Renaissance to the science fiction epics of today. This is not a niche interest, it is a fundamental thread in the fabric of human civilization, a testament to our species' unique need to look up and not just feel small, but to feel connected, to feel that we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. As you go about your life, I invite you to carry a piece of their legacy with you. The next time you find yourself beneath a clear night sky, away from the city's glow, take a moment to simply look up. Let your eyes adjust to the depth of space. Consider that you are gazing upon the same stars that inspired Pythagoras to dream of a celestial symphony, that guided the Magi on their pilgrimage, and that filled Newton with a reverent awe for the divine architect. That sense of wonder you feel is your inheritance, a birthright passed down through every single one of these 25 legends. You don't need a telescope or a secret formula to participate in this ancient conversation. You need only curiosity and the willingness to be humbled by the magnificent unknown. Now we turn the conversation over to you. Which of these cosmic communicators resonated most deeply with your own sense of wonder? Was it the logical faith of Galileo, who believed studying nature was the highest form of prayer? The defiant, infinite cosmos of Giordano Bruno, the psychological maps of Carl Jung, who found meaning in the strange coincidences of everyday life, or the hopeful, listening science of Jill Tarter and Carl Sagan? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which legend story sparked your imagination and why. Your perspective adds another voice to this timeless human dialogue. So from all of us here, thank you for joining this exploration. Keep looking up, keep asking questions, and never lose that sense of awe. The universe is vast, mysterious, and if these legends are to be believed, it has always been waiting for us to listen.